Hey, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge, everyone. In round number 10, the game of the day was played by Vladimir Kramnik, Big Vlad, against Levon Aronian. Let's see what transpired over the board. Kramnik with white, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. All right, we're going to have an Italian game here. Bishop c5. And here, there's a number of ways that white can play here. If he plays c3, then that's the Giuoco Piano. The idea being that c3 prepares white to play d4 and establish a classical center. Or white could just simply castle here. b4 is the Evans gambit. If black accepts the gambit, then white will play c3 followed by d4, again trying to establish a nice classical center. And then d4 is the Max Lang attack. In this variation, white says there's no need to even prepare a move like c3. Let's just go ahead and play d4 right away. But Kramnik didn't choose any of those. Instead, he played a bit of a sideline. He played knight c3. And then Aronian responded with knight f6. So we have a 4 knights variation. And d3. Instead of playing d4 right away, Kramnik says, I'm going to develop my pieces. I'm going to castle my king. And then we'll take it from there. So next, you have a6 here. This is sort of a prophylactic move to give the bishop an escape square on a7 in case white plays something like knight a4. Kramnik plays knight d5 here. So you have an exchange. Knights come off the board. Bishop d5. And now you have d6. This releases the light square bishop here. And it also threatens to play a little combination where if the bishop can get to g4 and then the knight can come to d4, that's going to put a lot of pressure on white. And white would have to destroy his pawn structure in case the bishop ever captured the knight there. White's pawn structure would be destroyed with the g takes bishop. So you have bishop e3, bishop takes, so that now the bishops come off the board, and white's pawn structure here is destroyed, but he has some pluses to go along with it. He has this semi-open f-file that he's going to be able to utilize once he castles. And then also, this pawn here on e3 gives more support to the center. So now he's fighting for control over the center, and when he does play d4, that extra pawn in the center there is going to help out. So you have castle, castle. Knight b8, this is an awkward looking move here for the knight to go back to its starting place, but Aronian wants to reroute the knight to the f6 square, so this is the best way to do it. b4, this is a clever move here. If you're unfamiliar with this theme, then you would not really understand the reason behind it. You would probably just think that white is trying to expand on the queen side, but actually b4 is a move that looks deep into the position and realizes that at some point c6 is going to get played hitting the bishop here, and now the bishop can retreat back to b3, and he's not going to be blocking in the pawn, the b pawn. He's going to be behind the b pawn now. Knight d7, the knight's headed over to that f6 square. Queen d2, c6. There we go. Aronian hits the bishop. Now the bishop retreats back to b3. a5. Now you have some queenside expansion on the black side here. This is normally where black plays in these type of positions. Black plays more on the queen side, and white will try to launch an attack on the king side. a3, knight f6, h3. This is a prophylactic move by white. This keeps the bishop and the knight off of that g4 square. h6, rook a b1, b5. Now you have some queenside expansion here for black. And again, this is usually the way that black plays in these type of positions here. You also see these type of positions in like Ruy Lopez openings where it's a similar pawn structure. Queen c3, this hits the unprotected c pawn. Bishop d7 protects it. Now you have rook f2. White would like to double up on the f file and utilize this semi-open f file here. Queen b6 hits the undefended e pawn. So white defends it. Rook f e8. This is like a mysterious rook move that Aaron Nimzovich talked about in his book My System, where even though this file is not open yet, he sticks the rook here behind it so it can lend support to that e pawn there in case the center does open up here in the near future. The rook will be well placed here on the e8 square. Knight h4. And just going back one move here, knight h4 opens up an opportunity for white to play rook takes knight here. A lot of times you see these type of exchange sacks in the Sicilian Dragon where black will sack his rook for the white knight on c3, and it's a similar idea. White will give up the material. He'll sack his rook, but he'll tear open black's king side over here, and maybe he can get an attack for it. c5. Now you have rook e to f1, because now when black pushed c5, he's no longer attacking this e pawn right here. Now white is doubled up on that f file. C takes b. Queen goes back to e1. It protects that pawn there on e3. This pawn here is hanging on a3. So how would you continue now as black? Would you go ahead and snap off that pawn on a3? Well, Aronian played d5 here. He went for some central play, but there was a nice little computer line that the computer was recommending. The computer liked a4 right here, hitting the bishop. And then white plays rook takes f6, going in for that exchange sack. White gives up the bishop here. A takes bishop. Rook takes f7. Queen drops back to help defend. And now you have queen g3 hitting the pawn here, threatening checkmate on g7. g5. And then now you have c takes b3. The engine like this line here for Aronian. Aronian is slightly better because he has this passed a pawn here, which is only 2 squares away from promotion. And actually all of his pieces are able to defend white's attack here. So it looks scary. This looks like something that you would not want to play into, but Aronian is better here. But that, like I said, that's a computer line. The computer likes this line. The computer doesn't care about how scary positions look. It just goes off of the evaluation of the position. So it's easier said than done. So let's go back to see what Aronian played in the game. So in the game, Aronian played d5, going for a central play here. A takes B, D takes E, B takes A, which hits the queen. So now the rook takes, and you have this clever move here, knight g6. Kramnik is getting tactical. The knight is immune from capture because it's pinned by the bishop. So bishop e6 breaks that pin and renews the threat now of the pawn capturing the knight. But now you have knight takes e5, snapping off that pawn. E takes d3. And here, how would you continue for white? What would you play? Would you just snap that pawn off, knight takes pawn? Or Aronian went in for the rook sack. Rook takes knight, the exchange sack. Pawn takes and rook takes. And here, just take a minute and evaluate the position. Kramnik has so many threats. You know, he can play rook takes h6. He can play queen g3. He can play knight takes f7. Bishop captures bishop. He's got a lot of threats right here. So it's that exchange sack that Kramnik played is well worth. He's well compensated for it. d2. Aronian is trying to divert Kramnik's attention away from the king side. What would happen if Kramnik accepted that pawn right there on d2? If queen takes, now you have rook a1, king f2, queen a5, and here this is threatening to play queen e1 here, and white can't have that, so white would have to trade queens, and then black would actually be okay. Black wouldn't have any problems because black would be up in material, and white's attack would be stalled. So this would be the best continuation for Aronian. So let's go back here. So obviously Kramnik does not take that pawn there in d2. Instead he plays queen g3, check. And now if the king moved to h8, now you would have rook h6, checkmate. If the king goes to h7, now you would have c4. And now black cannot stop the checkmate that's going to follow after the bishop goes to c2, check. And then once the king moves back to h8, then you have that rook captures pawn on a6, checkmate. So Aronian played king f8. That was the best move there. Now, if knight goes to d7, because king f8 allows knight d7 check, that forks the king and the queen there. If king goes to e7, the knight snaps off the queen, but then you have rook a1, king goes to h2, rook h1 check, king is forced to capture. Now black promotes and gets another queen. King goes to h2, it's only move. King takes f6. The king snapped off that rook there on f6, and believe it or not, black is winning here. He's up in exchange. So that move there that allows the fork, that allows white to fork the king and the queen, actually leads to a winning position for black. So let's go back. If the bishop captures, instead of the king moving, if the bishop captures, then you would have rook takes f7, checkmate. So Aronian definitely could not have captured that knight there. But Kramnik didn't play any of that. what Kramnik played here is rook f1. He didn't go in for the fork here, forking the king and the queen. He didn't go in for this. Instead, he played rook f1, protecting the back rank because of this pawn, this monster pawn right here. He didn't go in for the fork there. Rook a7. This is a defensive move that protects any sacks that might occur on this f7 square. Knight g6, check. King g7. And now you have knight f4, the discovered check. King goes to h8. Knight h5. And now how do you stop mate in 1? Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with a good way to stop mate in 1. Well, if you play rook g8 here, which looks like the most obvious way to stop it, that runs into queen e5, check. After f6, queen takes on f6, king h7. Now you have bishop takes e6, which hits that rook. And at the end of this here, there's no immediate checkmate, but this is a winning position for white. And especially when you factor in the fact that you're playing against Vladimir Kramnik, one of the greatest players of all time, he's going to take this big advantage and take it to the house. So that does not work. Let's go back to the position in the game. Again, how do you stop mate in 1? The correct way to do it in this position is f6. Black has to play f6. And now you have knight takes f6, rook f8, queen f4, which hits the pawn on h4, threatens an eventual checkmate. So you have rook h7, queen e5. And I just wanted to point out right here that even though it looks like black is getting crushed, the engine gives a dead draw for the last few moves here. For the last 2, 3, 4 moves, the evaluation has been 0.00, which is hard to believe, but black is definitely holding here. But it's a very difficult position to play. There's so many threats, and there's so many moves where you have to make, there's only one correct move in the position. You can't make any other move and hold on. Positions like that is very tough to play. Eventually, you're going to make a mistake. And that's exactly what Aronian did right here. He finally cracked. Because these type of positions is just super hard. You cannot make any mistakes at all. Rook g7 was the best move here. This would shield the black king from any discovered checks once the knight moved away. So what happens here? Knight e8. And Aronian resigned right here because you have the discovered check and then the queen is being threatened. But it's not even about the queen being threatened here. This is just a mating net that black has walked right into. Checkmate is about to happen for black. If play would have continued, it would have been, let's see here, if rook g7 was played to block the check, then you would have rook captures rook, bishop g8 to block, rook captures the bishop, king goes to h7, and now queen f5 check, rook g6, and then queen takes the rook, checkmate. And then one more variation that might have happened was if the king went to g8, then you would have queen takes e6, check, rook f7 to block, knight f6 check, king goes to g7, queen g4 check, king goes to f8, queen g8 check, king e7, queen e8 check, king d6, and finally knight e4 checkmate. So this was a wonderful attacking game played by Kramnik. I have to say again, Kramnik is playing very, very aggressively. It's very un-Kramnik-like, his play in this tournament. I will say it again. He wants to leave nothing on the board, even if that means that he's going to lose. He is playing all out. So unfortunately for Aronian, this is another loss for him. So I kind of feel bad for Aronian because he's such a great player, but he never performs well in the candidates tournaments. Many people think that Aronian could really challenge Magnus Carlsen in a heads-up match, but he's never going to get the chance to do it because he can never win the candidates tournament because that's one of his poorest tournaments that he plays in. He underperforms in every candidates tournament, and he even admits it. I was watching a press conference a few rounds ago, and he was even talking about how he never plays well in these candidates tournaments. So it's kind of unfortunate that, he's not going to get the chance to even challenge the world champion Magnus Carlsen anytime soon. Well, everyone else drew today, so Fabiano Caruana holds on to his half-point lead. He actually played the player that was right on his heels, Shaq Mommy, and they drew today. So, okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed the game. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time.